I'm Andrew Zimmern. You remember that old saying, beef, it's what's for dinner? Well, I'm gonna show you how to take two very different cuts of beef, butcher them, cook them, slice them using a variety of knives, and build two of my favorite sandwiches that I know are gonna become two of your favorite sandwiches. You're gonna wanna see how I do it. Guess what? Pretty obvious. Today is brisket day. I've got a monster here, 13 pounds of brisket. I like to buy the whole brisket, trim it myself. I usually get a couple of pounds of meat that I can trim and cube for making stews, and the rest I can season, sear, slow cook in liquid, braise it in the oven, and then build the perfect beef torta. Shall we start trimming? And I'm gonna take about 4 inches off of this end. We're gonna deal with that in a second. I'll show you how to cube and trim those up. Take a cue from the most obvious clue in the room, which is the fat cap here. You can see how dense it is, and you can see where it gets denser. I wanna leave a 1/4 of an inch to 1/3 of an inch of fat, and I just like to use a nice long knife that I've choked up on. Just come across and remove the top, get it down to something that's manageable. You want to move your knife and feather away some of this very serious extraneous fat. Do not worry about exposing pieces of meat in your brisket. It is going to happen. Brisket is a very irregular piece. I mean, look at how much fat I'm able to. Imagine that being liquid and floating around in your braise. There's this big flat muscle that runs from front to back. And look here, you see how those strands are literally going north and south? And then you can see here, this big fatty marbled nose or horn. Those strands are going east to west, which is why once it's cooked, I'm gonna cut that whole thing off and slice it in a different direction. So the next thing we want to do is season our brisket, because we already let it come to room temperature, which is really important so that when we brown it and get it into liquid, it's cooking right away. First thing, sprinkle it with salt, oregano, cumin, little chili powder. I'm gonna rub this, really massage this into the meat. It makes a big difference. I've preheated this big griddle here. I just want these to get a little glassy before this baby goes right on top of that. Beef stew. I really don't want any exterior fat. So I'm using a long slicing knife to feather against where I know the meat to be. I just use a 5-inch Honosuke, just a Japanese utility knife, and it's perfect for dragging the tip across, just sort of an all-purpose kitchen knife. I'm just making 1-inch by 1-inch squares. Here I have 2 pounds of meat that I can put into the freezer. Deal with that later. I want to bring this whole thing to a simmer. To cover or not to cover? The answer is neither. We tent it. It allows evaporation of the liquid, but it keeps the heat underneath there, and it just returns condensation onto the top of it. So I'll let it go for about 5 hours, and then we'll check it and see how tender it is. I preheated my oven to 350 degrees, because I know when I open it, heat's gonna leave there. And I've lowered it to 325. Brisket perfection. I've got some of the braised onions. I'm gonna season those with my Mexican seasoning. I love this stuff. We worked really hard making these blends. While I'm cutting this, I'm gonna take these bolillo. It's a great Mexican sandwich bread. I'm just gonna put these in the oven for a couple minutes. This top muscle goes east to west. You can see the grain. And you can see here that the flat, which is the muscle on the bottom of the brisket, goes north to south. So typically what I do is I just take this piece right off. I can take this fat that's in between those two muscles and just put it to the side. And so here we have the flat of our brisket, and I want to cut the brisket against the grain. And here is perfect brisket. Mouth tender. Look at how beautifully this knife powers through that brisket. This is a brisket slicer, but I use this to cut and carve any roast, boneless legs of lamb, prime rib. It is literally the best meat slicer that I know of on the market. It is a stunner. Let me just show you two random slices here. Notice the difference? This was the top of the brisket. And remember, I trimmed it, but I said I didn't want to take off all the fat because I like this bark and I like that little bit of fat in between. Then we have the lean. That's perfect, right? Everyone's favorite all-purpose utility knife. Let's go with the beef. Pickled onions, those braised onions loaded with all of that beef juice. It's like a Mexican banh mi. Some queso Oaxaca, some of that tamarind salsa. Soft, pillowy, stunning sandwiches. And the brisket, that muscle is perfect. Flat is perfect, moist, beefy. Sweet and sour, tangy and fruity, rich with dairy, herbal and green, vegetal and aromatic, pliant and sweet, rich and beefy on the perfect bun. I mean, my goodness. That is a delicious torta. A classic cheesesteak. I love them. And I love them Philly style. Shaved, paper-thin pieces of beef tossed with your choice, onions, mushrooms, peppers, put on a toasted, seeded roll, and of course, plenty of whiz, right? I like it with. My favorite place in Philly to get one is John's Roast Pork. Okay, that's out of the way. But one of the things I like to do at home is to deconstruct it in the sense that I'm still using all the same ingredients. I'm just cooking each ingredient separately. So I have 3 pans preheating here. 2 of them are gonna be for my veg, and it's important that they preheat. When I'm searing things like peppers, I wanna make sure I get a hard sear, but at the same time, I also wanna make sure that I don't overcook them. I want them wilted. Still wanna get a little crunch from that fresh pepper flavor. And by the way, as you can see, I'm using an 8-inch Narukami, which is a chef's knife. It comes in really handy for slicing, push cutting, because my entire hand fits underneath the apogee of the blade. Simple push cut, not too thick, not too thin. This pepper was long. I'm gonna go at an angle. Got my peppers there. Mushrooms, take a little piece off, then rest it on that cut, right? That way it's flat, and you can just use a very simple, safe method, and the knife is never leaving my knuckles. I am literally feeling the knife the entire time. Let's get a hard sear on those peppers. Get a hard sear on those mushrooms. Little oregano. So now that I've got that kind of searing action on each one, I am good to go. They're still a little bit crunchy. See how I'm getting that nice sear on that mushroom? A little more oil in my pan. I don't need this to be too thin. 1/4 inch. There are my sauteed mushrooms. Onions, I want them to get nice and sweet and caramelized. Won't take very long. Are you wondering where my beef is? It's in the freezer. So why do you ask, is my meat in the freezer? Well, I'm using a rolled, boneless, tied prime rib of beef, the ribeye, right? And I want to slice it really, really thin. So if it's a little bit frozen, like you let it sit in there for a half hour, 45 minutes, and I use one of Shun's brisket knives, I can actually get long, thin slices. So here we go. Now, the fact that the exterior is frozen, but the interior is soft, means that I can slice this super, super thin. Turn the other side around. Those are the most frozen parts, right? Because it's thawing and coming to temperature really, really fast. I have about a pound, maybe pound and a third slice here, plenty for my sandwich. I now have about a pound and 3/4 left. This is perfect for 2 or 3 people for a beautiful prime rib dinner. This is Shun's Classic Utility Knife. And I love the Classic Utility Knife because it does just about everything. Don't let those soft little kitty serrations fool you. It is sharp as a razor. And I like to take the end off. Look at how that just glides through bread, right? And I can go right down the middle of this. And because of its blunt nose, I can use it as a sandwich spreader. I love minced Calabrian chili peppers. The next thing, just a little bit of oil. And then we have all of these really thin slices of ribeye, pepper. I start playing with it when I see some of the pieces sear all the way through, right? Everything on the bottom is gonna look like that. That looks pretty good to me. Brown is the color of flavor, my friends. Never forget it. And so now I'm gonna start flipping some of these. I mean, look at that. I mean, that's just beautiful. Peppers, onions, mushrooms. Lots of beef ribeye. Provolone and American. And this just goes right under the broiler. Bingo, bango, boongo. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Yeah, baby. This sandwich does not go on a plate. This sandwich deserves its own board. And look at this plow through that sandwich. That, my friends, is a steak and cheese sandwich. It's not a cheesesteak, but it sure does taste like one. I'm just gonna sit here and keep eating until both these halves are gone. Good night, everyone. And remember, all of our recipes, including the sub recipes and lots of other cool, fun stuff, is always available at andrewzimmern.com.